Hey, can you hear me?
Are you there?
Hello.
Hey.
I was talking before and I was like, nope, he can't hear me.
No, I'm sorry. I was sending a text real quick.
No, you're
Oh,
fine.
no,
Long
I'm
time no
sorry.
see.
Hey, I'm sorry. I was being rude about the whole Jenny Riddell thing, but that's just,
You are being recorded.
I better not be. Oh, it does say recording. Stop that. Shut that off right now.
Don't worry, I plan on editing this out. Don't worry.
Yeah, you're going to edit all kinds of stuff. All my
I'm gonna try
controversial stuff.
to. I'm not
All
a
my
video editor.
controversial stuff. You're going to edit that right out of there.
I'm actually gonna make it into like this, like the heading,
What's that?
all the controversial stuff.
Oh, okay. Um, it's kind of funny. I for a long time as a student, grad student, all that other stuff, you're told it only matters what other people think, right? And then it's really hard to make that switch when you finish your doctorate. I mean, I'm 8 years, no, how long am I in now? I'm 10 years in now to my doctorate, and it's only just now starting to dawn on me. Wait a minute. I'm actually allowed to say what I think now. I don't
What a
have to.
thought.
Other people are quote. I saw somebody actually quoted me in one of their papers the other day, and I was like,
Really?
"Wow, yeah." Dr. Craig Gilbert says, and I was like, "What? That's weird when you become a citation."
What a compliment.
I don't know about all that, but
I think it is.
um, it's definitely interesting. So, and now that I'm teaching, I keep getting the Professor Gilberts, and I keep looking for Professor Gilbert. I don't know where he is. Professor Gilbert, what do you think? Who's Professor Gilbert? I don't know. Ask Professor Gilbert what he
Who is
thinks.
this guy? He sounds smart.
Who is Professor Gilbert?
That's
Oh, I got to go
funny.
close this door. I'll be right back.
Okay.
So here's something fun. I'm doing this in a room that has auto dimming lights. So there is a possibility that while this is going on, the lights will go out and I'll have to wave my arms and turn the lights back on.
I think that makes it fun. I will be keeping my microphone on mute because, as you can hear,
Yes, I hear the doggy.
yes, they're a little jealous.
Mm, I have dogs as well.
So you understand.
I do. I do understand. I have a very large lab, almost 100 pounds, who lives in my backyard. And then I have a small min pin that lives in my house. And we let the lab in twice a day. He gets to come in the house. And when he's in the house, the two of them play. And my lab can literally put put the entire head of my Min Pin in his mouth.
Oh my
And
goodness.
does not bite, but he does put the whole head in his mouth. And my wife and I have laughed and said, one of these days he's going to get mad and we're not going to have a dog anymore.
Oh my goodness.
It's pretty crazy. Hey,
That
we
is
have a third
stressful.
person. If someone else has joined us.
Listen, early bird catches the worm. That's what I always say.
There you go.
His name is Brad. Hi, Brad. I don't know if he can hear us.
Oh, I don't see him. Am I the only one that's going to be on video?
No, you shouldn't be. If they turn on their videos, everyone should be able to be seen.
All right. Yeah, I used Zoom for a video conference, I guess about 4 weeks ago. And there were 3 or 4 people on it. And we were all over the screen.
Yeah.
And then it highlights who's speaking and all that good stuff.
Right. I
Cool.
think that's fun. I love how you can connect with people just all around.
Yeah, it's pretty crazy. Like there's 2 more meetings. I told you I was in San Bernardino this past weekend, and there's 2 more meetings, and I will be either Zoomed in or Skyped in to both of those meetings. I won't actually be present, but they're gonna put me on the table with the team that's discussing worship, and they're gonna put a microphone up, and I'll be able to hear them. And
It's really cool.
Yeah, I'm liking it.
It's also hard when you're like the person on video though, because like you can't turn and see anyone.
Right.
Like, when you're the person that's like on the camera or on the
Right.
computer. So how's your class going?
It's going really well. I'm teaching an introduction to worship class,
Mm-hmm.
and the folks in here that are in this class are a variety of roles, but most of them are pastors. And I blew their minds in the first week and it's so funny because I'm just barely scratching the surface. And I blew their minds in the first week because I'm asking questions about worship they've never even thought to ask.
Oh my
Right.
goodness.
Because
Yeah.
we just accept, the majority of people in life accept whatever is given to them, and they don't ever ask any questions. And that includes worship in the church. Most people who grow up in church or have lived, have been in church most of their lives have never asked, why do we do what we do on a Sunday morning? They don't know. They've never asked. And so when you start putting them in a place, because I remember that feeling when I first started asking questions, because I was raised, you don't ask questions in church, right? You just take whatever is given and say, thank you, may I have another. And so when I first started asking questions, I say that when my academic self met my church self, because I knew to ask questions in academia, but not in church. And so when my academic self met my church self, it was really mind blowing. And then of course, the further along I went, the more and more and deeper the questions got. It really starts to challenge you. And so these folks are dealing with that right now. They're asking questions of the worship in their church in ways that they've never thought of before. And then last week we were talking and somebody goes, man, I just can't believe how deep we are. And I said, if this was a pool, you're in the kiddie pool. I said, we're not even close to deep. But it's fun to take that journey with them and to, there's nothing I enjoy more than watching the light bulb go off. Because one, I love the fact that they're exploring something brand new and understanding it. And two, it's an affirmation to me that I taught it in a way that they can understand, you know? So it's a double win when that light goes off, that light bulb goes off.
Yeah. It's so cool.
Love teaching, always have. And being able to teach at the graduate level is really the ultimate, because you don't have to run away from the heavy stuff and the hard stuff. But you have to be careful. You can't just, if you push too hard, they can't keep up. And so you don't, you still have to pace yourself, but it's really, really a lot of fun.
That's so cool. Yeah, I doubt I could have had those kinds of conversations with my seventh graders that I taught. So,
I loved seventh grade, teaching seventh grade. I loved teaching seventh and eighth grade. Those were my two favorite grades to teach. I taught school in all the way through the 90s. The whole decade of the 90s, I was a school teacher. And I love teaching junior high school, seventh and eighth grade specifically. And I tell people say, well, why? And I say, because they're old enough to talk to, but they're young enough to scare. And you still had a little bit of an intimidation factor. You still had a little bit of an authority, role. Once you slid into high school, that was pretty much done.
Right. So.
Hey, Brad, your microphone is muted. Oh, that's right. They're supposed to be muted. Never mind.
They can say hi. Why not?
Yeah, I would
there
love
will be
to have them
times
say
for
hi.
like question and answers too.
There's Brad.
Can you hear
Brad's
me now?
microphone. Yeah, we can hear you now, Brad. Welcome.
Oh, wow. Well, thank you. I'm actually working, just trying to squash this in when I can.
No worries.
Can you see me?
Nope, can't see you.
Oh, okay. Maybe next time.
Where are you, Brad?
I'm in Sydney, Australia.
Okay, good.
I'm joining in on worshipping with the Hillsong.
Uh-huh.
In Bella Vista.
Oh, cool.
For Brian Houston.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'm just starting out. I'm just looking into where I'm going to head or where God's taking me.
Wonderful. Well, hopefully something here will help you out. Something in what we're doing today, talking about today.
It sounds good. Thank you.
So, what time is it in Sydney?
It is 8:53
in the morning.
AM. Yeah.
Yeah. That's crazy. It's 5 p.m. It's 5 p.m. my time.
Okay. Yeah,
yesterday. Yesterday for you. It's 5 p.m. yesterday. If I understand the international date line correctly, it's 5 p.m. yesterday.
Okay. Yeah, I had no idea. I'm just working away. I clicked on it to see what happened.
It's October 30th where you are, right?
That's a good question.
I was just curious.
It's the 30th. Yeah, it is the 30th.
Yeah. So yeah, it's 5 p.m. on the 29th here.
Okay.
That always blows my mind. We're actually on 2 different days.
I should come back over there, put Lotto on, and come back to Australia.
So I think Lexi at Worship Leader told me that we have 6 people total signed up, but we will see how many are actually able to log on and be a part of it.
Okay.
So we have a few more minutes.
Yeah, that's okay. I'll just hang around.
Okay, wonderful. Well, I'll holler at you right at 5 o'clock and we'll get started.
Okay, sounds
or
good.
5, 3, 9, whatever.
Yeah.
Whatever time it is.
I'll try my best unless a client comes and gets me. I'll try my best just to hang around.
Sure.
And do what I can for this session. How's the coffee there?
It's good. I brewed it nice and strong.
It was weird because I'm looking at you drinking your coffee and I was drinking my coffee at the exact same time.
Oh, well, how about that? Yeah, I still have to. I'm actually doing this from Houston my classroom at Houston Graduate School of Theology. I actually have a 6 o'clock lecture. So we're going to. We originally had this scheduled for 3 p.m. Central Time, but we ended up with it at 3 p.m. Pacific Time. So this is I'm gonna have students walking in while we're doing this. It's gonna be awesome. My worship students will be. I teach a worship class, and my worship students will be walking in while we're doing this. So this will be fun.
That's interesting. Keep you on your toes.
Yep. Yep.
How's the weather there?
Hot. Always hot.
Yeah.
Yep. It's
about 20. It's about 20 degrees here.
What is that? I don't speak metric.
I'm not sure actually.
Yeah, I'm not sure either.
Not hot and not cold. Just
Yeah.
nice.
Well,
Spring weather.
We're of course we're in fall, and it's but we don't really have a fall. We just have a long summer that turns into winter almost overnight. I'm in Houston, which is right down on the Gulf of Mexico, and the Gulf of Mexico is basically a giant bathtub, and so it's warm almost all year round. And so we have humidity most of the year. Well, actually all year, sometimes really heavy, and so it keeps everything really warm. And so it's not until some of the colder weather starts coming down from the Arctic, and then when that hits, we just all of a sudden we're cold. We really don't get we're two seasons. We have summer and we have winter, and then we'll get about 2 weeks of fall and about 2 weeks of spring, and that's going to be about it.
Okay. Yeah, here it's hot and cold and hot and cold.
Oh wow.
We get a hot summer up to like unbearable heat.
Yeah.
And really cold in winter.
Yeah.
Where there's ice on the screens and all that type of thing.
Sure.
So it changes very quickly.
Picked up another. Hi, Michelle.
How are you?
Just fine.
Awesome.
Glad you're here joining us. And where are you joining us from?
I'm in Bowie, Maryland.
Bowie, Maryland.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So it's 6 p.m. where you are.
It sure is.
We're joined by Brad, who's in Australia, and it's tomorrow in Australia.
Oh,
Hi,
gosh.
Michelle.
How are you?
Very good, thank you.
Fantastic.
When I hang up with you, I'm going back to my office to work on another.
I'm sorry, my husband's talking.
There is a chat thing from Lexi over at Worship Leader down at the bottom. If you want to click on that, you should see it down at the bottom of your screen. If you want to click on that, you can see what
Oh, great.
A video.
Mm-hmm.
We'll wait just a couple of minutes and see if anybody else comes on. I think we had 6 people total signed up for this. And so we'll give them just a couple more minutes to come on, and then we'll have to start. I was telling Brad I have a lecture class. I'm actually in my classroom at Houston Graduate School of Theology. I have a lecture class that starts at 6 o'clock. So I'm going to have students walking in while we're doing this. So this is going to be a lot of fun. They're actually in a worship class that I teach here. And so, they're gonna walk in and they're gonna wonder what's going on, because I told them this was happening earlier today, so they're not real. This will be fun.
I have something to share if you want to hear it.
What's that?
I just received Isaiah 55:1. It says, "Hey, come everyone who thirsts to the waters, come, he who has no money, buy and eat. Yes, come, buy wine and milk without money and without price.
Well, good.
That just came up on my screen as I was listening to you.
Well, y'all can come and receive, and hopefully we'll share. So we're going to go ahead and get started. If anybody else joins us, they'll join as we go. And so, Lexi, is that good with you?
Take us away.
All right. So I'm really happy that you guys are here. I will tell you this is being recorded, and it's going to be reposted somewhere at some time. I'm glad that you've decided to join me on this. Let me just say that if you can, I want to be interactive. There'll be a couple of places where I ask questions, but if you'll hold on to questions and comments and stuff till the end, I'll make sure that we have time for you to ask questions. So you might want to jot them down when they come to you, and then that way you can ask them when we get to the end. Also, you're going to see me looking right and left. I wrote everything that I have to say down simply because if I just riff on this, there's a good chance we won't get anywhere because I love this topic and topics like this one. And so I wanted to make sure that I kept some thoughts on paper, at least to get us through the first initial part of this to make sure that we stay on topic. So the topic for the webinar today is authentic worship. And so my first question to both of you is, have you ever heard somebody say, you know, I'm really looking for authentic worship, or a church that has authentic worship, or perhaps a worship leader who said our worship is we hope our worship is very authentic. Is that something that sounds familiar to you guys?
Most definitely.
Yes, it does. Yeah, we study it a lot.
Well, so let me just start off by saying, some of these comments I'm making directly to you two guys, but I'm also remembering that there will be other people watching this at a later time. And so let me just start by saying that before we finish, either could be one of you two guys, or it could be somebody who's watching this later, but somebody's going to be mad at me. Just going to tell you that right now. Somebody's going to disagree with me, and some people are going to like what I have to say and think that it's good. But as long as you're thinking about the topic and not just reacting, then I'm happy. Because my biggest issue a lot of times with worship is that it's a very personal thing that we feel very personally invested in. And so we don't often spend the time actually doing the thinking, the cognitive processing that needs to be done when we're dealing with tough questions. And this is a fairly tough issue. This isn't like a song of, well, should I play a fast song or a slow song? We're talking about authentic worship, and so that can be pretty emotional. So just hold your decisions till you hear me all the way through, and then whatever you decide about the comments that I make on it, that's perfectly fine with me. I love the discussions, and Maria Fisher has just joined us. Glad to have you, Maria. So let me tell you a little bit about myself, first of all. If you don't know anything about me, I have a doctorate in Christian worship studies and theology, and my specialty is in congregational worship participation. So basically, through and I've been I've been a church worship leader for over 25 years. I've been in church my whole life. Basically, it's my job to know what congregations are thinking in and about worship, to try to know what they're thinking, to try to know why they're thinking whatever they're thinking, and determine what and how that knowledge can be used to better design and present worship. So I field all sorts in my conversations with congregation members. I field all sorts of interesting thoughts and suggestions and desires for worship and about worship, as well as any number of justifications and defenses for thinking or suggesting or wanting those things. And so when we deal with this topic about authentic worship, there are a lot of opinions out there. There are a lot of people who want to jump in on that and have already pretty much formed what they think about it. So when we're talking today, I hope that you'll open up and think about some things in a new way. So here's my first thing with dealing with authentic worship. when we answer questions that deal with worship or the church, our tendency is to go to the Bible first. Someone asks a challenging question, and the typical first response is, well, let's see what the Bible says about that. The problem is it doesn't really matter what the Bible says. Now, before you start throwing heresy things at me, it doesn't matter what the Bible says if the Bible isn't the source of the comment or the question. You have to first actually determine what are the people wanting to know, or what are they thinking when they ask that question. There's no way to deal with that question or desire unless you fully understand what's the root of the question. Our first response should more appropriately be, that's interesting, why do you ask? Or in the case of the statements we're dealing with today about a desire for authentic worship, before we can talk about what the Bible says about authentic worship, we first have to ask, what do you think authentic worship looks like or sounds like or consists of? In other words, what makes worship authentic in your opinion? If you don't start there, you'll spend a lot of time with minimal impact on the actual issue. I know already from some of the posts on Instagram and on my own Facebook page, the initial, it proved out, the initial response when I made the comment about what does authentic worship really even mean, the initial comments almost immediately went to the Bible and started pulling scriptures out. The problem is the majority of people in your congregation that you're going to talk to, or the unchurched person or the moderately church person who's saying that they want to find a church that has authentic worship, they're not thinking about what the Bible says about authentic worship necessarily. They're thinking about what does that mean to them? What does an authentic worship service feel like or look like? And we have to determine what is that opinion before we can even start cracking into the Bible and finding out what the Bible has to say. Let's talk about just real quick the word authentic. It's a really challenging word because even though it has a very simple definition, the application of the word is so situational and so cultural that it's very, very difficult to pin down. So the dictionary says that, and I'm going to read it off here, it's of undisputed origin or it's genuine. But when you're on the street, when you're talking to people, authentic can mean a lot of different things depending on the context. For instance, in food, let's just talk about food for a second. I live in Texas, and we love Mexican food. And so the authentic can mean closest to the source. But here in Texas, that doesn't necessarily mean real Mexican food. In fact, here in Texas, we love what we call Tex-Mex. It's a blend of Mexican food and things that we've done to it with Texas ingredients. And so it's not the same as authentic Mexican food. So if I say I'm looking for authentic Mexican food around here where I live, I'm actually probably looking for authentic Tex-Mex, not necessarily street tacos that they would sell in Brownsville or in Mexico City. And then, then you keep pulling out the derivatives, and you can get further and further away. One of my favorite videos that I found on the web dealing with food and authenticity the other day was a video of Japanese people eating American sushi. And talking about the differences between what the authentic Japanese sushi is compared to what we in America call authentic sushi. So in food, authenticity is relative. It's relative to whatever our starting point is. Another favorite thing I love is in retail, people will talk about something authentic versus a knockoff. So, is it a derivative of something more authentic? So for instance, if an item is made by, name your designer here, I don't do designers, but let's say it's a men's messenger bag. And so you want an authentic whoever's messenger bag. Well, when I say authentic, I don't necessarily mean who designed it. I actually want the source of the design. So is it an authentic 1950s lineman bag? Or is it, which was actually the source for the modern messenger bag? Or does it go back to the Pony Express mail bag? Or it can actually go all the way back to the Roman soldiers had a bag, a messenger type bag that's called a loculus. And so when I say authentic, how authentic do I really want to be? And then, of course, it goes into music. And when you go into music, anything's possible. Somebody might say, I love authentic blues. Okay, well, really? Which authentic blues do you like? Do you like authentic Mississippi Delta blues? Do you like authentic Chicago blues? what's the level of that authenticity? It just means something different to different people. So let's jump to our topic today. The statement says, I'm looking for a church with authentic worship, or we're striving to offer genuine, authentic worship here. And those are noble statements and they're credible goals. But what does that even mean? So I know from just completely anecdotal evidence, various social media posts, Christian types want to run to the Bible. We talked about that. So I've spent a lot of time talking to people who say statements like these, and I spend time asking the question of, okay, well, what does that mean for you? And this is from would-be churchgoers to excellent leaders. The truth to the answer is they all have a predisposition. And before anybody says, let's look at the messenger bag, for example. How far back in history do you want to go to call something authentic? So is the person who says they want authentic worship looking for what they consider to be an original versus a knockoff, such as this church is trying to be, insert your popular church model here, and they just can't do it. I think the original is the only way to go. So stop trying to knock off something and be authentic. So let's pick any popular church. I hesitate to mention any church's name, but just take any popular church and say that a local church is trying to, quote unquote, copy them. And so the person comes in and says, well, I'm looking for authentic worship, and this is just a copy. I want the real thing. So I would rather watch the real thing on video, or I'd rather go on the stream, or I would rather whatever. Then somebody might say, I want to go back to the authentic version of, insert your denominational influence here. I want to go back to that worship. The stuff we do today is so far from where we started. I know that I work with United Methodist churches a lot, and people will say, well, we're not really Wesleyan anymore. I want to go back to some authentic Wesleyan worship. I want to go back to the roots of worship. Well, they don't actually mean the roots of worship. They mean the roots of their denominational worship, which only takes history back so far. Or I've heard this from a lot of people who are seeking a different worship experience. They'll say, house of worship is the only authentic form of worship because that's where we started. That's not necessarily true, but that's what they think authentic is, so that's what they're looking for. They don't want to go to a large church. They don't want to go into a congregational situation. They want to go to a house church. And because that's the authentic worship of the Bible, that's, they're looking at the New Testament church and saying, well, that's real authentic church. Again, that's a version of authenticity, or a definition of authenticity, that does not necessarily mean we are we're not even close to the Bible yet. We're still dealing with a cultural context, and that's a very important distinction as church leaders, because again, we want to run to the Bible, we want to go to a verse, and yes, we're eventually going to get there, but we really have to understand what it is that people are wanting, having that conversation with them. What does that actually mean? And I love those conversations. Those are hugely enlightening conversations, because I don't ever correct anybody. It doesn't matter what they think it means. It just matters where they are. God doesn't ask us to become theologians before God meets us where we are. We shouldn't ask the people who are looking for authentic worship to become theologians and Bible scholars before we address them where they are, and talk to them inside their context. And have a conversation with, what does it mean? What does this authentic worship you're looking for actually look like? What does it actually sound like? If we were to do it, what about our church doesn't feel authentic to you, or doesn't seem authentic to you? And you can learn a lot by having these types of conversations, instead of always trying to convert the person who feels like you're inauthentic and prove to them that you really are authentic because you follow and we'll talk about some of the Bible references, but you follow this particular Bible reference, or you follow that particular Bible reference, or here's this core theological statement. That's not going to convince them, because that's not what they were looking for to start with. So ultimately, at the initial level, authentic worship means whatever it means to the person who's looking for it. But what does that mean for us who are leading? How are we supposed to know what to do, how to prepare, how to meet the expectation? And this brings me to my last anecdotal meeting that I have that's most prevalent in the conversations that I had. What I find most people mean by authentic worship, when I sit down and talk to them and have coffee with them, or I love sharing an order of fries at McDonald's. That's always a lot of fun. It has nothing to do with history. It really has nothing to do with the church model. The majority of people that I talk to who are looking for authentic worship, what they're actually saying is they're substituting the word authentic for the word honest. That's why you saw the word honest in the title of this presentation. In some people's minds, authentic is, or at least should be, easier to define than honest. So honest is they have a hard time defining honest, so they substitute honest with authentic as if somehow authentic is easier to define. It really isn't. But in reality, honest is the purest form of authentic, because honest is basically authentic. But being authentic by cultural definition is not always being honest. Again, like we said, like I was saying earlier in the historical context, just because it's authentic to a particular period or a particular point of reference does not mean it's the most authentic version of whatever it is that you're talking about. There could be a more authentic version or a more original version. And so that's why authentic can be so difficult to define and pin down. But if we switch it out, like I said, for what most of these people think, the word honest, now, when we get up to that definition, now we have something we can work on biblically. Because this is something, truth, change the word honest to truth, and now we're really in the Bible. And we're really at the core of what Jesus has to say about worship, what God has to say about worship, what the Bible has to say about worship. So if we take out the word authentic and put in the word honest, which seems to be the core of what most of these people are thinking, then our desire is to jump straight into the Bible. But remember, we're dealing with this from this person's perspective of the stated desire. So we have to determine what honest worship would mean to the person who is speaking. They may or may not know what God thinks, and so we must first meet them where they are. And so we have to understand them. In my experience, honesty in the church can be very hard to come by. Take, for example, this now famous quote by Brennan Manning. And I don't know if you're familiar with this quote, but I don't, some of you will talk about why it's popular, but the quote goes like this: "The greatest single cause of atheism in the world today is Christians who acknowledge Jesus with their lips, walk out the door, and deny him by their lifestyle. That is what an unbelieving world simply finds unbelievable." Now that quote is credited to Brennan Manning, but here's an interesting side note. I heard a person talk about this quote and attribute it to DC Talk because it was used at the beginning of their song, "What If I Stumble?" And for that person, the authentic source of the quote is DC Talk, even though it's a quote from someone else in a book that they wrote. So, but let's go back to that quote for just a minute. They acknowledge Jesus with their lips, walk out the door, and deny him by their lifestyle. Now, here's an honesty in worship that's not on the stage. Here's an honesty in worship that is tied to life. The Jewish concept of worship is very important here because it's 24/7. Acts of worship are not just what we do in a room with a collection of people. It's every action that we use in our life. It's everything that we do in our life is a reflection of our attitude and our relationship with God. That is an understanding of worship that I think is very important. Because again, when we limit authentic worship to just what happens on the stage, just what's said in a prayer, just what's sung in a song, just what's preached in a sermon, we're missing the total witness of worship, which is by what we do and not just by what we say and what we sing. The most authentic form of worship is how we live it. So in this case, and for people who are saying this, and so it's what an unbelieving world finds simply unbelievable. And so this quote drills down to a first level of authenticity and honesty. The amount of hypocrisy in the church, not just now, but in every period of church history, is incredible. Every Sunday in your local church, we're surrounded by hypocrisy. And if we're being honest, and authentic, we are ourselves hypocrites, especially by the world's definition. How many times a day does your walk not line up with your professed beliefs in basic ways? Do you really always tell the truth? Do you really always share love unconditionally with everybody? And on and on and on. And then these hypocrisies build up, and when multiplied across an entire congregation and then the entire church, they can make for a pretty credible case of dishonesty and inauthenticity. So for the non-believer or the marginally church person seeking authentic worship, where did I go? Maybe it's as simple as wanting to find a place where what they see and experience is congruent with what they know, or at least think they know, about what worship, the church, and being a Christian, ultimately just the whole thing about being a Christian. Maybe authentic worship in their estimation is a place where they experience the church looking and acting like the church they believe is the authentic version of the church, whatever that means for them. Again, I've had these conversations, and it's funny the things that people will attach to inauthentic worship. And rarely is it what's happening on the stage. It's almost always what's happening in the pews, what's happening in the seats. How are people treating each other? That's the first point of contact for worship, not the song that you're singing. In fact, as worship leaders, unless you're out there shaking hands, you may or may not ever influence their feeling on authentic worship. You may never get the chance, because the first feeling that they have whether something's authentic is the usher that they meet. Or the first feeling they have about whether something's authentic is the person whose seat that they're sitting in when they visit, and that person gets upset because someone's sitting in their seat. The first the first feeling that they have whether something's authentic is how their child's received when they drop them off in childcare. That's not even close to the worship that's in the room. They haven't even gotten there yet, but they're already making choices about how authentic your church is. And by how authentic they feel like your church is, that's how authentic your worship is. So we have to understand that this is the authentic worship for the person who's saying these kinds of things often is not what's happening on the stage, even though eventually it can be. There's an important thing that I learned from a psychologist, which is the presenting problem is rarely the problem. The thing that they're finding inauthentic is rarely the thing that they're identifying as inauthentic. It's something else that they've bumped into that doesn't fit what they think or feel like church actually is. But that doesn't excuse us or change the fact that we have to work hard to be authentic in a biblical way. Sure, for those of us who are further along in our beliefs, we know that grace is amongst our sin and our shortcomings. That's how we see grace. That's how we find grace. We're sinful. We miss. We have shortcomings. We rely on that grace for our salvation. But does our awareness and reliance on that grace cause us to be dishonest about our actions? Do we shield ourselves from the consequences of our actions because we know our intent? We meant to be authentic. We meant to be honest. We really tried. Isn't that enough? Well, again, go back to that quote. They hear us saying it with our lips, but they don't see it in our lives. They don't see it in how we worship and how we interact with God. As a result, it doesn't feel authentic because it doesn't reach what they believe to be, whatever it is they understand the definition of worship to be. So again, I understand this is kind of diving deep, and it's diving deep pretty fast, but we only have a little bit of time. So let's just go on. This is big if we can jump through the first hurdle to honesty on our way to authenticity. The role of being honest in our worship actually goes even further, especially how it relates to others. So there are some who, when they go to the word on this particular issue, jump straight to John 4, and they quote Jesus at the well, and he says, the one who worships the Father worships in spirit and truth. Well, here we have worship and truth tied together, but here comes another big question. So what is truth? It would seem that if truth and honesty is the ultimate authenticity, then worshiping in truth is what we as leaders should be seeking. But what or which truth? I know I can hear you saying God's truth. Okay, well, what does that mean? And before you start telling me your version of what that means, or a particular pastor or teacher's versions, let me just say there are literally hundreds, even thousands of sermons and writings on this one verse alone, much less the entire truth that is the Bible. So good luck nailing that down. The reality is that authenticity is often in the eye of the beholder. God's the final judge of what is or not authentic, but as believers and disciples of God, we're called to and have to deal with and answer the desire of people who want to experience authentic worship. So what does that mean to me? Let's get down into just some things that maybe you can, what do I have to bring to the table when planning worship? For me, and now we're going to switch into, this is just what I think. This is my take. The answer lies in the words of Christ when he was asked about the greatest commandment. He gives not one, but one and one A. Love God with all you have and love others the way you love yourself. So for me, authentic worship is rooted in truth as I am demonstrating my adherence to two equal missives by what I offer in worship. Am I worshiping God with all I have, or am I holding something back? And this is a big key, because again, what I have found is that a lot of what people mean when they're looking for authentic worship is not necessarily about the relationship to God, but the way others treat others and their relationship to others. Am I willing to want what others desire to have in worship as much as what I desire to have in worship? That's what loving someone as much as you love yourself. Am I willing to allow what someone else wants in worship to have just as much importance as what I want in worship? And am I willing to sacrifice both for whatever God desires in worship? So I'm here to tell you that if we're honest, truthful, the worship of our churches falls short of both of those benchmarks pretty much every time we gather in one way or another. If it didn't, we would never have arguments over what we're singing in worship. If you've ever had an argument over what we're singing in worship, we wouldn't have those arguments if we were able to actually love others as much as we love ourselves in worship. Everyone would be willing to make room for the desires of everyone else in the service. In fact, we would be lucky if we did anything, because everyone would be insisting that we do what another person wants over what they want. Or in my mind, a more accurate application, our services would take forever, because we would insist that everyone's favorite song or song they would like to sing be offered, so that everyone would have a chance to worship God in their favorite way, just as we want our favorite way to be represented. And of course, every Sunday, every church would be overflowing, because short of illness or injury, not one person would ever let anything come between them and spending time in God's presence among God's people. That's the ultimate drill down of the application of those two commandments to worshiping in truth. So before we start telling anyone how authentic our worship is, let's be honest. A truly authentic worship experience is completely beyond what we're capable of alone. But thankfully, we have God's Spirit and God's grace to help us along in our efforts. So I think Paul said it best, or said it well, in Romans 12, 1-2. Let me read this for you. Therefore, I urge you, brothers and sisters, in view of God's mercy, to offer your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and pleasing to God. This is your true, there's that word truth, and proper worship. Do not conform to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the thinking of your mind. Then you will be able to test and approve what God's will is, his good, pleasing, and perfect will. Offer your bodies as living sacrifices. This is your true and proper worship. Take that truth, take that and move it to honest, and then move it to authentic. How is that being relayed in the worship in your church? How are people displaying or being a living sacrifice? It's important because it's about being who we're called to be. If you're a plumber, can you honestly tell someone you can build their house or fix their car or set a broken bone? No, we are who we've been created to be, and we're to offer what we are to the Lord. So a church worshiping honestly in an authentic way does so in truth and spirit, just like Jesus said, and that worship displays the fruit of the Spirit. It is welcoming in a way that is like God, pure, honest, and authentic. The people are welcoming and loving in a way that is spirit guided, honest, authentic, as it says in Colossians 3:13 and 14. Bear with each other and forgive one another if any of you has a grievance against someone. Forgive as the Lord forgave you. Over all these virtues, put on love, which binds them all together in perfect unity. So, what does it mean in a practical way for worship? So let's ask some questions of the worship in your church, and I'm just going to give you a few things to think about. First of all, where am I? Is the music you use in worship welcoming, or is it exclusive to the local membership? Do you present it in a way that anyone is invited to and is able to participate? Actions that are to be directed to God and build unity amongst God's people. Are those actions actually accomplishing those goals, or do they just pay lip service to those goals while actually only welcoming and pleasing those? When was the last time you sat down with one of your services and asked the hard questions? Why is this? Insert any action that you'd like. Why is it here? How does it forward worship? How does it welcome to accurately portray God to God and others what we believe to be true about God and God's relationship with us? These questions and more lead us towards, when we ask questions about our worship, that we begin to move toward authenticity. It's when we just throw it out there because we're so smart, or because it's what we've always done, or because it's what we believe to be right and proper, and we haven't asked the questions, and we haven't really made our worship stand up to the test, that we miss. When we're honest about where we fall short, then we can seek out God's help to overcome those areas of weakness, being true about who and what we are. Then we're powered by the Spirit in our worship, because we cannot fully live out God's commands in worship without the Spirit's help. Now we're worshiping in spirit because we're worshiping in truth. And that's when we're being our most authentic. I hope that you can get a feel for that. A lot of times it can be a scary place to be, because we start digging into our worship and we start asking questions of our worship that we don't have answers for. And so then we have to go find answers, but we will always be better when we start finding those answers. But if you really want the key, I can take all of this and really simplify it down to a couple of things. If we listen to the people who are asking for authentic worship and we have the conversation with them to find out what that actually means, then we can, if it's not biblical, if it's not what God says or God expects worship to be, then we can guide them in that way. But the only way we'll ever have that guidance stick is if we are doing everything that we can to be as authentic and as truthful as we can about ourselves, about our congregations, about the church as a whole, and its role in the world, and how it's viewed in the world, and how we can build those relationships. Worship is both vertical and horizontal. It does have to do, it's obviously about our relationship to God, but it was also given to us as the people of God to gather to be in relationship with each other. Read the book of 1 Corinthians. It's all about relationships in church, and it's all about how people are treating each other in the presence of God. And it's church. It's how to be church, and being church is part of that worship. So I would just encourage you that first of all, don't think that the question of authentic worship is easy to answer, and don't think that one Bible verse or one point of view is going to solve that problem or do anything more than just shed light on one part of it. Don't let it be that easy. Let it be something that you want to chew on. Let it be something that you want to dig into. Let it be something you want to ask questions about. Let it be something that you want to determine for yourself, for your worship team, for your church, and how can you best live out that authenticity in worship for each other. So I want to stop there. That was a whole lot of information in just a few minutes. But now I want to ask you guys to jump in here, and let's have a discussion, and let's ask some questions, and see where things lead, and see what we find together. So anybody have a question? Anybody want to jump in? Crickets.
This is Michelle here. I don't necessarily have a question, but I really am, what's the word? Inspired, I guess, because I feel that you have just kind of, though it's a difficult topic, you really have just narrowed it down to what God says is just so important, that we love him with all of our hearts, with everything that we have, and that we love others. And if we can demonstrate that in our daily living, and thus demonstrate that as we are and convey that as we are leading worship, we, then potentially with God's help have a shot, so to speak, at people being able to themselves experience God, or certainly be inspired to connect with him.
Well, I appreciate that. I think one of the things that's challenging for me, or one of the things I think we're sometimes blind to, is, let's say we're up there singing about God's love, and we're singing about love, and we're lifting up love in worship, and we're saying that this is really important, and that person is not experiencing love amongst the people that they are surrounded by.
Mm-hmm.
Surely they're going to be challenged by that. And that's going to be inauthentic, and that doesn't mean that I'm not authentic in my belief and in my lifting up of that song and lifting up of that praise. I'm being truthful. That's how I really feel, but that's not what they're experiencing, and that is just as important. Yes, we want them to experience God's love, but God's love, the Bible says we are Christ to the world. Are we being Christ in our worship, in all aspects of it? Somebody else with a question? Anybody? All right. Well, does anybody disagree with me or anything? No? All right. Well,
It's Brad.
Yeah, Brad.
I haven't got a question, but I do have to get back to work, and I apologize for that. But yeah, thank you very much for that. And just it reminded me of listening to you just how important it is for everyone else, not for me, myself, or what I'm going through. I feel God calling me to do that for everyone else in the church, and be an example of love. Like, it's very difficult for me to come out of love after what I've been through in the past, and it's just another reminder for me just to dig deeper and go further into love and express myself through worship, and be real about that, not be ashamed of the love that I have inside for the church and all that type of thing. But for me to be authentic, I really have to get back to it, because I'm caught in a stage between finances and worship, and
Well,
appreciate
you being here, Brad. Thank you so much for sharing that comment.
I'm sorry if you heard me before, because I was running through with a client.
Didn't hear you at all.
Oh, okay.
You were muted out. It was perfectly fine.
Okay, no worries.
Awesome.
All the best to you, and God bless.
Thanks, Brad.
Happy to be in the next session. Thank you.
Yep.
Thanks, Michelle. See you.
But thank you. But if I can add also, I think all of these comments also point to the fact that we cannot minister in a bubble. So it's not just about, as you mentioned earlier, what song we've, selected and how well we've, prepared to execute, that music, but it's all of us that make up the particular congregation. We all play such an important role in representing Christ. And I think this just really drives that point home, that, as sometimes musicians We think worship is all about what we do, but it really isn't. It really is all of us striving to live as Christ would have us live and convey that to others.
Sure. When I was talking about asking questions about your worship, when I teach worship planning, one of the first things that I talk about is asking the question, is what you're planning actually accomplishing what you think it is? And when was the last time you assessed that? And how do you assess it? How do you know if that's happening? And so asking those questions of our worship, we often will leave our congregations with nothing to do but sit and watch. We want them to sing, but then did we plan a song that they can actually sing, or is it a song that they're pretty much just going to be left as spectators? These are all parts of that. Authenticity, truth. What is the truth? You say you want, I'm a visitor coming into your church. I'm seeking an authentic worship experience. You tell me that this is a song for me to sing. And so I want to sing, I want to join, but now you've selected something that I can't sing. Even if I want to, I can't sing it. So now what could have been an authentic experience is not an authentic experience, because what you told me was true is not true. And so it's a challenge as planners. We have to put ourselves in the pew. And I would challenge any worship leader, pastor, if you can possibly take a Sunday and go worship somewhere else as a first-time visitor, go to some church you've never been to and remember what it's like to walk into a church for the first time. Even as an experienced Christian, remember what that feels like, and then go back to your church and put yourself in that place. How does it feel? How does it feel for somebody to walk in here for the first time? What is their experience? And is it an authentic Christian experience? Is it true to what what Christ intended, what God intends for our worship to be? And if it's not, then then that's where we need to work. Because again, it's fine that we can know all day long what the Bible says about worship, and what the Bible says is true worship, and what the Bible says is authentic worship. But if we're not living it out, if we're not making it happen, then it doesn't matter what we know. And if the people who are coming are not experiencing it and are not feeling like they're experiencing it and seeing it, then it's not accomplishing what you're hoping that it's going to accomplish. Yes, you can be having a great relationship with God, but where is your relationship with others as well? Because I think that goes back to the core and the root of what Jesus was saying when he said, you love God and then love others, and those are equal. They're the same. If you look back at the 10 Commandments, what are the first 4 commandments? They're your relationship with God. The last 6 are your relationship with your parents and your relationship with others. Those relationships are inexorably intertwined in God's love. Anybody else? Anybody else with a question?
Yeah, I have a question.
Sure.
So I'm a new worship leader in the sense of I've been singing for a few years, but I've now been placed in charge of the worship team. And so how would you go about, because earlier you spoke about how our worship should go beyond obviously Sunday mornings and singing. It should be how we live our lives so that it can be authentic.
Sure.
So how would you go about helping one of your teammates that you see outside of church living in a way that is not necessarily viewed as correctly for them being on the altar every Sunday?
Well, my first question is are you the leader of the group, or are you a member of the group?
The leader.
Okay. So as a leader of a group, that's a responsibility. And so the one thing that a lot of leaders will do first off is they will talk to the whole group and talk about your responsibility and talk about what it means to represent the church and represent what the church believes and what the church teaches outside of the church. And I think that's a good thing to do. I think that you should have very clear parameters and guidelines and clearly disciple and lead the people on your team and talk about what it means to be a member of the team. I've had those conversations. And if everybody on your team doesn't understand that, then that's where you have to start, and everybody has to accept it. And it's kind of like, I'm just thinking of this for the very first time, but here's a metaphor. I just traveled this weekend on a plane. I had 2 plane rides, and I sat in the exit aisle on both planes. I sat in the exit row, and there's an FAA regulation that they have to explain to you, the flight attendant has to explain to you the role and the responsibility of somebody sitting on in the exit row, and they have to have a verbal eye contact response before they can let the plane take off. You actually have to look at them and say, yes, I accept that responsibility. And I'm amazed at how many worship leaders and churches that I've been in where they don't have that conversation with their with the people on their worship team. They haven't sat down and talked about what does it mean. Not just I have seen them talk about the practice requirements. We expect you to learn your song and it needs to be memorized. You need to be off book by Sunday morning, blah, 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 blah. But they haven't sat down and talked about what it means to be a Christian, what it means to be a representative of this church. And being on this team it means that when people look at your Facebook page, they're seeing our church. When people look at your life, they're seeing our church because you've chosen to go to church here. You've chosen to belong to our leadership team. You represent what we believe, and they've not had that conversation and got in a visual, verbal, yes, I agree to do that. So if you haven't done that, that's where you have to start, because you can't call somebody to task on something that they haven't had the conversation with, because they may be doing something in their life that you have a problem with, but they don't feel like is necessarily contrary to the Bible. They don't necessarily feel like it's contrary to the walk. You don't know where they are. So you have to have that conversation first as a team. And then once everybody gives that verbal commitment, now you have an opportunity when you see it again to be able to call that person up and say, hey, let's go have coffee and let's have a conversation. You remember when we talked as a team about this? Well, there's something going on that's concerning me. And can you tell me how you feel about that? How do you feel like, don't jump straight into a judgment, let them have an opportunity to talk about how they feel like what they're doing is relevant or blends into what you have talked about as a team, and then have the discussion from that point of view. But I really believe it has to start with at the very beginning, that everybody on the team knows where the baseline is and what the baseline expectations are.
Okay, that makes sense.
Does that help?
Yeah, it does a lot.
Okay, good.
Thank you.
You bet. Anybody else?
That was a great question.
Well, and I've been there.
A great response.
Well, and I've been there. I was that worship leader where I hadn't had that conversation with my team, and I found out that a team member was not representing our church well, or at least in the way that I felt. And it wasn't a big moral thing. This was just a small thing that was happening. And I felt like that, but I hadn't had the conversation. We hadn't talked about what it meant to be on our team and what it meant to be part of the worshiping community of my church. And in that case, as a worship leader, you're functioning as a pastor, you're functioning as a spiritual shepherd and leader, which is what your church has asked you to be. And some worship leaders want to push that off and make that somebody else's responsibility, but I don't see how it is anybody else's responsibility. It's who we are as leaders. But that going back to our question of authenticity, that is they could be very clearly being authentic to themselves, because we haven't asked them to be anything other than that. And I've had team members who have said, you know what, I don't really agree with all of that stuff, but I want to be on the team, and I understand that's my responsibility. So, I'm going to walk in that walk because this is where I want to be. I don't necessarily agree with it. I don't necessarily agree with that interpretation of the Bible. I don't really think the Bible says that, but I want to be on this team. I want to be in this church. I want to represent this. So I'm willing to make that walk. And so, there you go. At least they've made the commitment, and then you have grounds for having a conversation later on. We got time for one more question. Well, I do want to say that if you liked what I had to say, I do have a DVD series where I teach congregations and worship leaders and pastors and anybody else who wants to see it. I talk about what it means to be a worshiper, what it means to worship in the church, from historical, theological, biblical foundations, all the way up to just straight up, what does this part of the church service mean? What does it mean when we do this? What does it mean when we do that? It's geared toward just the average Joe congregation member. You don't have to be a Bible scholar to watch it, and it can be used as can be used in Bible studies. It could be used on its own. Anyway, it's available if you're interested. It's on the Worship Leader magazine. Just opened up a store, and it's available at their store as well as on Amazon.
I said I'm interested.
Okay, so it's on the Worship Leader store. Oh, there it is. If you go to the chat, if you haven't clicked on chat on the side, there's a link to it there. Also, you can find, I have 2 Facebook pages. One of them is The Worship Doctor, and the other one is Passionate Purposed Heart Worship, Purposed Heart Ministries, sorry. And then I have 2 web pages, theworshipdoctor.com and purposedheartministries.com. Would love to have you interact with me. We're going to be putting up more content coming up. And then, of course, would love to have you. I'm going to go ahead and pitch Worship Leader. We have of course, the National Worship Leader Conference is coming back up this coming May in Nashville. I will be there, and so will some of the best teachers and worship leaders from across the country. And we would love to have you all come and be a part of National Worship Leader Conference this year. Registration is available on the Worship Leader page, or you can Google National Worship Leader Conference and you'll see it. Or Lexi may throw that link up there. We'll see how fast she is. And then I'm also now writing a back page column for Worship Leader magazine. There you go. There's the click. And then, oh, she's waiting for the link. I'm writing a back page column for Worship Leader magazine, where I'm going to be dealing with deep topics like this, beyond just the what song should I pick or what light should I shine. Those are all important things for us to know. But I like dealing with those questions that go beyond. They go down to the heart. They go down to the spirit, and really challenge us. And so if you are not a subscriber to Worship Leader magazine, I encourage you to do that, both either digitally or in print. And you can check out my column in the back. Would love to hear your comments about that. Most of all, every single one of those places has contact information for me. And if you run into something that you have a question about, some issue, anything, and you'd like to contact me and just talk.
Hello?
No!
Hello?
We lost Craig. I don't know where he went, but I will send you guys all out. Oh, Craig, you cut out. You're back?
Yeah. You're back? I'm still here. Are you there?
Yeah, you cut out.
Okay. Well, thanks, guys. Appreciate y'all. And I'm going to step away, and we'll call this good. Lexi, is that good for you?
Thank you so much, Craig.
Everybody, she is our host from Worship Leader magazine.
Awesome.
Thank you, everyone, for joining us. I'm going to send you all an email with all of Craig's socials, his book. All of those links will be in an email for you. So thank you all so much for joining us, and thanks for your patience with the time zone issue. I'm so sorry.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.